The rifle shot echoed across the foothills, causing Naomi Danvers to flinch even though she'd fired it herself. The echo died away, leaving her standing alone in the harsh Texas sun of 1876, the melody she'd been humming moments before caught in her throat like a trapped bird. Naomi lowered the Winchester and stared at the weathered fence post she'd been using for target practice. The bullet had struck true, just as Thomas had taught her before the consumption took him 3 months ago. She resumed her song, a melancholy tune her mother had sung to her as a child. The words lost to time, but the melody etched into her heart. The Double D Ranch stretched before her, 200 acres of decent grazing land that had been Thomas's pride. Now it was hers alone, though the neighboring ranchers were circling like vultures, making offers well below what the land was worth. They assumed a widow of 26 couldn't manage on her own. "That's some fine shooting, madam," the voice startled her. Naomi whirled, rifle at the ready, to find a stranger sitting atop a chestnut gelding. He raised his hands in peaceful surrender, though his eyes crinkled with amusement beneath the brim of a well-worn Stetson. "State your business," Naomi said, not lowering the rifle. Strangers on her property meant trouble more often than not. "Name's Miles Weston," he said, tipping his hat. "Just passing through, heard your song and then the shot. Thought I'd make sure everything was all right." Naomi studied him. He was lean but solid, with sun-bronzed skin and a beard trimmed neat enough to suggest he wasn't completely uncivilized. No gun belt that she could see, though she spotted a holster on his saddle. "I'm fine," she said curtly. "This is private property." "So I gathered," he replied, nodding toward the Double D brand burned into the fence post she'd been shooting at. "Good land you've got here." "It is," she agreed, finally lowering the rifle but keeping it ready. "And I aim to keep it that way." Miles Weston smiled, and something about it reminded Naomi of spring after a harsh winter. "Don't blame you one bit. Would you mind if I watered my horse at your creek before moving on? Been riding since dawn." Naomi hesitated, then nodded toward the stream that cut through the eastern edge of her property. "Help yourself, then be on your way." "Much obliged," he said, and began to hum a tune as he turned his horse toward the water. Naomi froze. It was the same melody she'd been singing moments before. Not a common song, not one she'd ever heard anyone else know. "Where did you learn that song?" she demanded. Miles turned back, surprise evident on his face. "My grandmother, Irish woman, said it was an old country tune about a girl waiting for her love to return from the sea." "That's not how my mother told it," Naomi said, surprising herself by continuing the conversation. "She said it was about a shepherd who lost his way in the highlands." Miles's face broke into a genuine smile. "Well now, isn't that something? 2 stories for the same tune." He dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "Maybe we ought to compare notes." Against her better judgment, Naomi felt her lips tugging upward in response. It was the first time she'd felt like smiling since Thomas took ill. "I suppose that wouldn't hurt," she said, "after you water your horse." An hour later, Naomi found herself sitting on her porch with this stranger, sharing coffee and stories. Miles Weston, it turned out, was a drifter by choice rather than circumstance. He'd fought for the Union in the war, though he spoke of it rarely and with obvious reluctance. Since then, he'd worked cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, prospected in Colorado, and even spent a winter trapping in the Montana Territory. "What brings you to this part of Texas?" Naomi asked, refilling his cup. Miles gazed out at the land, his eyes following the contours of the hills. "Thought I might find a place to stop moving for a while," he said. "Getting a bit old for sleeping on the ground every night." "You don't look that old," Naomi said before she could stop herself. His laugh was warm and genuine. 34 next month, which is ancient in drifter years. Body's starting to remind me that I've asked a lot of it." Naomi nodded, understanding. At 26, she already felt the aches of a hard life in her joints some mornings. "You manage this place alone?" Miles asked, gesturing to the expanse of the ranch. I have a hand, Eduardo, good man with cattle, and his wife Maria helps with the house sometimes. Naomi set her cup down. It's enough. Is it? Miles asked, his voice soft but direct. Naomi stiffened. It has to be. The silence stretched between them, not entirely uncomfortable but charged with unspoken thoughts. I should be going, Miles finally said, standing and placing his hat back on his head. Thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Danvers. Naomi, she corrected, surprising herself again. And, if you're looking for work, I could use another hand for the spring roundup, just for a few weeks. The words were out before she'd fully thought them through. Eduardo had been hinting they needed more help, but hiring a stranger wasn't like her at all. Miles studied her face as if trying to read her intentions. Are you sure about that? No, she admitted, and they both laughed. But you know cattle, and I know Eduardo would appreciate the help. Well then, Naomi Danvers, he said, extending his hand. I believe we have an arrangement. His hand engulfed hers, calloused and warm. For the first time in months, the weight of solitude lifted slightly from Naomi's shoulders. Spring roundup was brutal work, but Miles proved his worth many times over. He worked from dawn until dusk without complaint, and his way with the cattle was almost magical. Even the most stubborn steers seemed to respond to his quiet confidence. Eduardo, initially suspicious of the stranger, had quickly warmed to Miles. He knows cattle, Eduardo had told Naomi one evening, which was the highest praise the taciturn vaquero could offer. 2 weeks into the roundup, Naomi found herself watching Miles more often than was strictly necessary for a ranch owner supervising her hands. There was something about the way he moved, the quiet competence in every task, that drew her eye. One evening, as the sun painted the western sky in shades of orange and gold, Naomi heard the soft strains of a guitar. Following the sound, she found Miles sitting on a fallen log near the bunkhouse, fingers dancing over the strings of a battered instrument. He was playing their song, the melody they'd discovered they shared that first day. But he was adding flourishes she'd never heard before, making the tune somehow both melancholy and hopeful at once. Naomi stopped a few yards away, not wanting to interrupt. Miles must have sensed her presence, though, because he looked up and smiled. Evening, boss, he said, continuing to play. Hope I'm not disturbing the peace. Not at all, she replied, moving closer. I didn't know you played. Not very well, he admitted, but it passes the time on lonely trails. Naomi sat beside him on the log, careful to maintain a proper distance. It sounds beautiful to me. Miles shifted the melody into something more complex. My grandmother used to say music is the shortest path between souls. Faster than words, truer than promises. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was, he agreed. Raised me after my parents died in a river crossing when I was 8, taught me that life doesn't stop for grief. Naomi looked away, feeling a pang in her chest. Sometimes it feels like it does. Miles's fingers stilled on the strings. I'm sorry about your husband. Eduardo mentioned he passed last winter. Consumption, Naomi said, the word still bitter on her tongue. He was sick for months, nothing I did helped. That's a hard way to lose someone, Miles said quietly. Watching them fade a little each day, Naomi nodded, not trusting her voice. They sat in silence as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear. Would you mind if I played some more? Miles finally asked. I'd like that, Naomi replied. And so they sat together in the gathering darkness, the music weaving around them like a spell, keeping the loneliness at bay for a little while. The next morning, Naomi woke to the sound of hoofbeats approaching her house. Looking out the window, she saw Harold Jenkins, owner of the neighboring Diamond J Ranch, riding up with 2 of his men. Her heart sank. Jenkins had been the most persistent of her unwanted suitors, convinced that a widow couldn't manage on her own. Naomi quickly dressed and stepped onto the porch just as Jenkins dismounted. Morning, Mrs. Danvers, Jenkins called, his voice falsely cheerful. Thought I'd stop by and see how roundup is going for you. Just fine, Mr. Jenkins, Naomi replied coolly. We'll be done in another week or so. Jenkins was a bull of a man with a florid face and hands like hams. He'd made his fortune during the war, though rumors suggested his methods had been less than honorable. "Good to hear," he said, climbing the porch steps uninvited. "Been thinking about your situation, Naomi. A woman alone out here, it's not right." "I'm not alone, Mr. Jenkins. I have Eduardo and Maria, and I've hired additional help for the roundup." Jenkins waved this away as if swatting a fly. "Hired help isn't the same as having a man of your own." He stepped closer, forcing Naomi to back up against the porch railing. "I'm offering again to buy your land, fair price this time. Or," his voice dropped, "we could combine our holdings through marriage. Diamond J and Double D together would be the biggest spread in the county." Naomi's hand inched toward the door where she kept a shotgun just inside. "I've told you before, Mr. Jenkins. I'm not interested in selling or marrying." Jenkins's face darkened. "Don't be foolish, woman. You can't hold on to this place forever. Sooner or later, is there a problem here?" Miles stood at the bottom of the porch steps, his stance relaxed but his eyes hard as flint. Eduardo was a few paces behind him, a coiled rope in his hands. Jenkins turned, his surprise quickly replaced by contempt. "This is private business, Cowboy. Move along." "Mrs. Danvers is my employer," Miles said, his voice even. "And she doesn't look happy to see you." Jenkins's face reddened. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "Just a hand doing his job," Miles replied, climbing the steps. "And right now, my job is making sure Mrs. Danvers isn't bothered by unwelcome visitors." The two men faced each other, tension crackling between them like lightning before a storm. "This isn't over," Jenkins finally spat, stomping down the steps. He mounted his horse and pointed a thick finger at Naomi. "You'll regret this stubbornness, woman." As Jenkins and his men rode away, Naomi realized she was trembling, not from fear but from anger. "Thank you," she said to Miles and Eduardo, "though I could have handled him." "No doubt," Miles agreed, his easy smile returning. "But why should you have to handle him alone?" The question lingered with Naomi long after she'd returned to her chores. Why should she have to handle everything alone? Thomas had been gone for months, and while she missed him dearly, life continued to demand her attention. The ranch needed running, decisions needed making. And for the first time since Thomas's death, Naomi found herself thinking of a future that might include something more than just survival. That evening, after a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, Naomi took her usual walk to the small family cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch. Thomas's grave was there, alongside his parents who had founded the Double D 30 years earlier. Naomi knelt beside the wooden cross marked with her husband's name. "I miss you, Thomas," she said softly, "but I'm keeping our home safe. The cattle are looking good this year." She paused, listening to the evening breeze rustling through the prairie grass. "There's a new hand helping with roundup, Miles Weston. Naomi searched for the right word. "He's kind, good with the cattle. Eduardo likes him." She traced Thomas's name on the cross. "I think I might ask him to stay on after roundup. We need the help and—" She sighed. "And it's so quiet here without you." As darkness fell, Naomi made her way back to the house. The sound of a guitar drifted across the yard, and she found herself following it to the bunkhouse. Miles sat outside on an upturned barrel, playing softly. The melody was different tonight, not their shared song, but something more wistful. He looked up as she approached. "Evening, Mrs. Danvers." "I thought we agreed on Naomi," she reminded him, stopping a few feet away. "So we did." His smile was warm in the fading light. "Naomi it is." She gestured to the guitar. "That's a pretty tune. Does it have words?" "Some," he admitted, "though I'm no singer." "I'd like to hear them anyway," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. Miles studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but don't say I didn't warn you." His voice was deeper than she expected, a little rough around the edges but true to the notes. The song told of a traveler who found peace in unexpected places, of roads that led back to home even when home was thought lost forever. Naomi found herself humming along by the second verse, and by the third, Miles had coaxed her into singing the simple chorus with him. Their voices blended in the night air, his low and steady, hers clear and sweet. When the song ended, a comfortable silence fell between them. "Would you consider staying on after roundup?" Naomi asked, the question coming out in a rush. "As a regular hand, I mean. The pay's not much, but there's room in the bunkhouse and—" "Yes," Miles interrupted gently. "I'd be honored to stay, Naomi." Relief washed through her, followed by a flutter of something else she wasn't ready to name. "Good," she said, nodding decisively. "That's good. Eduardo will be pleased." "And you?" Miles asked, his gaze steady on her face. Naomi felt heat rise to her cheeks, grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. "I'm pleased as well. The ranch needs good hands." Miles nodded, accepting her practical answer, though his eyes suggested he heard the words she didn't say. "I should turn in," Naomi said, suddenly aware of how improper it might look for her to be alone with a hand after dark. "Early start tomorrow." "Always is," Miles agreed. "Good night, Naomi." "Good night, Miles." As she walked back to her empty house, Naomi realized she was humming the song they'd just shared. For the first time in months, the silence of her home didn't feel quite so heavy. The weeks following the roundup settled into a steady rhythm. Miles proved himself invaluable around the ranch, fixing fences that had languished since Thomas's illness, breaking 2 young horses that Eduardo had declared too spirited, and even helping Maria patch the leaking roof of the hen house. Naomi found herself looking forward to their evening conversations on the porch, where Miles would often bring his guitar and they would share songs and stories as the stars emerged. Sometimes Eduardo and Maria would join them, but more often it was just the 2 of them, their voices mingling in the night air. Word of Miles's presence at the Double D spread quickly through the county, and Naomi noticed that Harold Jenkins and the other neighboring ranchers who had been pressuring her to sell had become less aggressive in their approaches. It seemed having a capable man on the property, even just a hired hand, had changed their calculations. One hot afternoon in late June, Naomi was checking the vegetable garden when she heard riders approaching. Looking up, she saw 3 men she didn't recognize, dust-covered and hard-faced, leading a pack horse laden with supplies. Miles appeared from the barn, walking toward the strangers with the easy confidence that Naomi had come to admire. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he called. "Something I can help you with?" The leader, a wiry man with a deeply scarred face, reined his horse to a stop. "Looking for the owner of this spread." "That would be Mrs. Danvers," Miles said, nodding toward Naomi but staying between her and the strangers. The scarred man's eyes shifted to Naomi, narrowing slightly. "Mrs. Danvers, we're looking for work. Heard you might be hiring." Something about the men set Naomi's nerves on edge. They didn't have the look of cowboys or ranch hands. Their eyes were too shifty, their manner too tense. "I'm afraid we're not hiring at the moment," she said, moving to stand beside Miles rather than behind him. "Our crew is full for the season." The scarred man exchanged glances with his companions. "That right, heard different in town, heard you were short-handed since your husband passed." "You heard wrong," Miles said firmly. "As the lady said, we're not hiring." The scarred man's hand drifted toward his gun belt. "And who might you be, friend?" "Name's Miles Weston. I run the day-to-day operations here for Mrs. Danvers." The name seemed to register with the strangers. The scarred man's eyes widened slightly and he studied Miles more intently. "Weston, you say, from Missouri originally?" Miles stiffened almost imperceptibly. "That was a long time ago." A slow, unpleasant smile spread across the scarred man's face. "Well, I'll be damned. Boys, we've found ourselves a genuine hero." The mocking way he said "hero" made it sound like a curse. Miles Weston, who rode with Bloody Bill Anderson during the war, killed more Union men than the fever did. Naomi felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She looked at Miles, whose face had gone completely blank. "You've got the wrong man," Miles said quietly. "I fought for the Union. 20th Missouri Infantry." The scarred man laughed. "That what you've been telling folks? Clever, real clever." But Jem Parsons never forgets a face, especially one that was riding alongside when his brother got his throat cut. Miles's hand hadn't moved toward his weapon, but Naomi could feel the tension radiating from him. "I think you gentlemen should move on," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Now." Parsons sneered. "We'll go, but folks around here might be interested to know they've got Bloody Bill's right-hand man living among them." He turned his cold gaze to Naomi. "You might want to ask your hand how many women and children he put in the ground during the war, Mrs. Danvers. Might change your mind about keeping him around." With that, Parsons wheeled his horse around, and the three men rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and tension in their wake. Naomi and Miles stood in silence until the riders were out of sight. Finally, she turned to him, searching his face for some confirmation or denial of the terrible accusations. "Miles," he wouldn't meet her eyes, "I should pack my things." "No," Naomi said firmly, "not until you tell me the truth." Miles finally looked at her, his eyes haunted. "Which truth would that be, Naomi? The one where I was a scared 19-year-old who got caught up in something terrible, or the one where I've spent 15 years trying to outrun what I did during the war?" "Both," she said. "I want to know all of it." That evening, after the chores were done, Miles and Naomi sat on the porch as the sun set. Eduardo and Maria had been sent into town for supplies, giving them privacy for what promised to be a difficult conversation. "I grew up in western Missouri," Miles began, his voice low and measured. "When the war broke out, our area was torn apart. Missouri was officially Union, but many folks, including my family, had Southern sympathies. My older brother joined the Confederate Army proper. I stayed home to help my grandmother with the farm." He paused, staring out at the darkening land. "In '63, Union militiamen came through our county. They burned farms, arrested anyone suspected of aiding the rebels. My grandmother's farm was torched. They said she'd been feeding bushwhackers, Confederate guerrillas. She died in that fire." Naomi's heart ached for the pain evident in his voice, but she remained silent, letting him continue. "I was 17. Angry, wanted revenge. When William Anderson Bloody Bill, they called him, came recruiting, I joined his guerrilla band without a second thought." Miles's hands clenched into fists. "I told myself we were fighting for the South for justice, but it wasn't about that. It was about blood and vengeance." "And you killed people?" Naomi asked quietly. Miles nodded, his face a mask of regret. "Union soldiers mostly, but sometimes. Sometimes I couldn't be sure who we were killing. Anderson didn't care much for the niceties of war. Anyone he thought had helped the Union was fair game." He took a shaky breath. "I wasn't his right-hand man like Parsons claimed, but I rode with them for almost a year. Did things I'll never be able to atone for." "What happened? How did you end up fighting for the Union?" "I got wounded in a skirmish, separated from the group. A Union patrol found me, but instead of killing me, their captain took me prisoner. Captain Grayson. He was from Missouri too, understood how complicated things were. Offered me a choice, hang as a bushwhacker or join the Union Army and fight properly." Miles gave a humorless laugh. "Wasn't much of a choice. So I became Private Miles Weston, 20th Missouri Infantry. Fought with them until Appomattox. After the war, I couldn't go home. Too many people knew what I'd done with Anderson, so I've been drifting ever since. Trying to do enough good to balance the scales, I suppose." Silence fell between them as Naomi absorbed his story. The man beside her had been both villain and hero, killer and protector. She thought of Thomas, who had sat out the war due to a childhood injury that left him with a permanent limp. "Why didn't you tell me?" she finally asked. Miles met her gaze directly. "Because I liked the way you looked at me. Like I was someone worth knowing, worth trusting." His voice dropped. "Worth caring about." The naked honesty in his words struck Naomi to her core. She realized with sudden clarity that she did care for him more than was proper, more than she'd allowed herself to acknowledge. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Leave, I suppose. Parsons will spread the word. No one in these parts will want me around once they know." "I want you around," Naomi said, the words coming before she could reconsider them. The past is the past, Miles. We've all done things we regret. Hope flickered in his eyes, quickly tempered by caution. This is different, Naomi. People died because of me. And you've spent 15 years trying to make amends. Doesn't that count for something? She took a deep breath. Stay, at least until we see what Parsons does. The Double D needs you. She hesitated, then added softly, I need you. The confession hung between them, fraught with meaning. Miles reached across the space separating them and took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. Then I'll stay, he said, for as long as you want me to. Parsons made good on his threat. Within days, word had spread throughout the county that the Double D was harboring a notorious bushwhacker from the war. Some neighbors stopped speaking to Naomi at church or in town. Others came by the ranch, ostensibly to warn her about the dangerous man she was employing. Harold Jenkins saw an opportunity in the scandal. He arrived at the Double D one Sunday afternoon with the local sheriff in tow, claiming that Miles was wanted for war crimes and should be arrested. That's not how it works, Harold, Sheriff Cooper said, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The war's been over for 11 years. President Grant issued a full amnesty for Confederate soldiers and guerrillas back in '68. Even if what you're saying about Mr. Weston is true, he can't be arrested for it now. Jenkins's face reddened with anger. He's a murderer, Cooper. And she's harboring him. He jabbed a finger at Naomi, who stood defiantly on her porch with Miles beside her. The war made murderers of a lot of men, Harold, the sheriff replied tiredly. On both sides. Unless Mr. Weston has broken the law since then, I've got no cause to arrest him. He threatened me last week, Jenkins claimed. Pulled a gun on me when I came to talk business with Mrs. Danvers. That's a lie, Naomi said sharply. Mr. Jenkins hasn't been on my property in over a month. And when he was, it was Miles who prevented him from threatening me, not the other way around. Sheriff Cooper sighed, removing his hat to wipe sweat from his brow. Look, Harold, I've known you a long time, but I also knew Thomas Danvers, and he wouldn't appreciate you harassing his widow this way. Jenkins spluttered in indignation, but the sheriff cut him off. As far as I can tell, Mr. Weston has been nothing but an asset to this community since he arrived. Mrs. Danvers's cattle are thriving, her fences are mended, and there's been no trouble reported until you started stirring things up. He replaced his hat. Now, I suggest we all go about our business and let bygones be bygones. After the sheriff and a fuming Jenkins departed, Naomi sat heavily on the porch steps. It's going to get worse before it gets better, she said. Miles nodded, leaning against the porch railing. Jenkins won't give up easily. Men like him never do. Let him try, Naomi said with more confidence than she felt. This is my land and I decide who stays on it. Miles studied her face, his expression softening. You're a remarkable woman, Naomi Danvers. She felt heat rise to her cheeks at the admiration in his voice. I'm just stubborn. That too, he agreed with a smile, then more seriously. But you should consider what this might do to your standing in the community. People respect you now. That might change if you keep me around. Let it change, Naomi said firmly. Any respect that's so easily lost isn't worth having. That night, unable to sleep, Naomi walked out onto her porch to find Miles sitting on the steps, guitar in hand. He wasn't playing, just staring up at the stars. Couldn't sleep either, she asked, settling beside him. Too much on my mind, he admitted. Wondering if I'm being selfish staying here. Is that what you want, to stay? Naomi asked, her heart beating faster. Miles turned to look at her, his face half illuminated by the moon. You know it is, but not just as your hand. The honesty in his voice took her breath away. What are you saying, Miles? He set the guitar aside and took her hands in his. I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Naomi. I didn't mean to, didn't think I had the right to, but there it is. Naomi felt dizzy with the sudden shift in their relationship. This moment had been building for months, she realized, in every shared song, every conversation, every lingering glance. I still wear my wedding ring, she said softly. I know, and I respect that. Thomas was a lucky man, and I wouldn't ask you to forget him. I could never forget him, Naomi agreed. But, she took a deep breath. But my heart seems to have room for new memories too, new feelings. Miles's eyes, so often guarded, shone with hope. Is that your way of saying you might feel something for me too? Instead of answering, Naomi leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but carried the promise of more to come. When she pulled back, Miles looked stunned, then broke into a smile that outshone the stars. "I'll take that as a yes," he said. Naomi laughed, feeling lighter than she had in over a year. "It's a yes, Miles Weston. Despite your past, or maybe because of it, because it made you who you are now, I've fallen in love with you too." As if to seal their declaration, Miles reached for his guitar and began to play their song, the melody that had brought them together that first day. This time, when Naomi joined in, their voices blended in perfect harmony, creating something new and beautiful from the ancient tune. The following weeks were filled with both joy and tension. Miles and Naomi kept their changing relationship discreet out of respect for both Thomas's memory and community sensibilities, but Eduardo and Maria were quick to notice the difference. They offered their quiet support, having come to respect Miles and to value Naomi's happiness. Not everyone was so accepting. Jenkins continued his campaign against Miles, spreading increasingly outlandish stories about his wartime activities. A few of the more impressionable townsfolk began to avoid the Double D, and Naomi noticed whispers following her in church. Yet for every person who turned away, there seemed to be another who stood by them. Sheriff Cooper made a point of stopping by the ranch regularly for coffee. The general store owner, Mr. Finch, loudly proclaimed that he didn't care if Miles had ridden with the devil himself during the war. His money was still good at Finch's Mercantile. And Reverend Patterson, after listening to some of the more vicious gossip one Sunday, devoted his next sermon to forgiveness and the dangers of judging others. Even the Apostle Paul was once a persecutor of Christians, he reminded his congregation, his eyes settling meaningfully on Jenkins in the front pew. Yet the Lord saw fit to transform him into one of his greatest servants. Who among us can claim the wisdom to judge another man's redemption? One evening in late July, as Naomi and Miles sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset, he turned to her with unusual solemnity. "I've been thinking about our future," he said, taking her hand. "Have you now?" Naomi replied, trying for lightness though her heart raced. "I have." Miles's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I know it's been less than a year since Thomas passed, and I would never want to dishonor his memory or rush you into anything. But I want you to know that whenever you're ready, whether that's next month or next year, I hope to make you my wife." Naomi's breath caught. She had known they were heading in this direction, but hearing the words spoken aloud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I want that too," she admitted. "But you're right, it's soon. People would talk." "People already talk," Miles pointed out with a wry smile. "But I understand the need to wait. I just wanted you to know my intentions." Naomi squeezed his hand. "They're honorable intentions, Mr. Weston, and I appreciate them." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Perhaps by Christmas the gossip will have died down enough." "Christmas it is," Miles agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "That gives me time to build us a proper house." Naomi looked up in surprise. "A new house, but I love this one, and we'll keep it," Miles assured her. "But I thought maybe we could build something that's ours together. Something that represents our new beginning, while honoring what came before." The thoughtfulness of his suggestion brought tears to Naomi's eyes. This was what she loved most about Miles, his understanding of the complex emotions that came with building a new life after loss. "I think that's a wonderful idea," she said. August brought a heat wave that parched the land and tested everyone's endurance. The creek that watered the Double D's eastern pastures shrank to a trickle, forcing Naomi to move cattle to the western ranges earlier than planned. Miles and Eduardo worked from dawn until dusk, ensuring the herd had access to what water remained. Naomi joined them whenever possible, her skin browning under the relentless sun despite the wide-brimmed hat she wore. It was during this challenging time that Harold Jenkins made his final play. Returning from town one afternoon, Naomi found Jenkins and 6 men waiting in her yard. They had caught Miles alone as he repaired the corral fence and now held him at gunpoint. "What is the meaning of this?" Naomi demanded, dismounting quickly. Jenkins turned to her with an unpleasant smile. "Justice, Mrs. Danvers, your man Weston here is wanted for murder." "That's absurd," Naomi said, moving toward Miles only to be blocked by one of Jenkins's men. "Sheriff Cooper already established that any wartime actions are covered by the general amnesty." "Not wartime actions," Jenkins said smugly. "Murder committed last month. A man named Jem Parsons was found dead 2 counties over. Throat cut, just like his brother's was during the war." He produced a wanted poster. "Sheriff over in Meridian County issued this yesterday." Naomi's blood ran cold as she looked at the crude drawing on the poster. It bore only a passing resemblance to Miles, but the name was there in bold print. "This is ridiculous," she said, though fear clutched at her heart. "Miles hasn't left the Double D in weeks. He's been here every day working from sunup to sundown. Eduardo can confirm it, and so can I." "Well now, that's not worth much, is it?" Jenkins drawled. "Considering you're sharing his bed." Naomi's hand cracked across Jenkins's face before she could think better of it. "How dare you?" One of Jenkins's men grabbed her arm roughly. Miles lunged forward, only to be struck with a rifle butt that sent him to his knees. "Stop it," Naomi cried. "This is unlawful. You have no authority here." "We're making a citizen's arrest," Jenkins said, rubbing his reddened cheek. "Taking this murderer to Meridian to face justice." "Then I'm coming too," Naomi said firmly. Jenkins shook his head. "This isn't women's business. Go inside, Mrs. Danvers. When this is over, my offer to buy your land still stands. You'll need the money once your hired killer is swinging from a rope." "The only criminal here is you, Jenkins," Miles said, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. "And Naomi's right, I haven't left this ranch in weeks. I never met Parsons before he showed up here, and I certainly didn't kill him." "Tell it to the judge," Jenkins sneered, nodding to his men. "Get him on his horse." As they dragged Miles toward the horses, a rifle shot cracked through the air. Everyone froze. Eduardo stood at the corner of the barn, rifle raised. "Let him go," the vaquero said, his accent thickening with anger. "Now, you're outnumbered, Mexican," one of Jenkins's men called. "Not quite," came Sheriff Cooper's voice as he rode into the yard with 3 deputies. "What's going on here, Harold?" Jenkins quickly explained about the wanted poster and his citizen's arrest, trying to paint his actions as civic duty rather than the personal vendetta they clearly were. Sheriff Cooper examined the poster, then looked at Miles. "You been to Meridian County lately, Weston?" "No, sir," Miles answered. "Haven't left the Double D in over a month except for church on Sundays." Cooper nodded. "That matches what I've heard." He turned to Jenkins. "Harold, I received a telegram from Sheriff Daniels in Meridian this morning. Seems they caught the real killer yesterday, a drifter named Morgan who had Parsons's horse and personal effects." The wanted poster was rescinded. Jenkins's face contorted with disbelief. "That can't be right." "It is," Cooper said firmly. "And even if it wasn't, you have no authority to make arrests in my county. Now, I suggest you and your men leave before I decide to charge you with attempted kidnapping and assault." Jenkins looked from the sheriff to Naomi to Miles, his plans crumbling before his eyes. With a curse, he mounted his horse and gestured for his men to follow, riding away in a cloud of dust and defeat. That night, after the excitement had died down and the sheriff had departed, Naomi tended to the cut above Miles's eye. They sat at her kitchen table, the lamplight casting warm shadows across their faces. "I thought I might lose you today," she said, her fingers gentle as she cleaned the wound. Miles caught her hand and pressed it to his lips. "Never. It would take more than Harold Jenkins to separate me from you." Naomi smiled, though her eyes remained serious. "When I saw them holding you at gunpoint, I realized something. I don't want to wait until Christmas." Miles's eyebrows rose. "What are you saying?" I'm saying that life is too uncertain to postpone happiness." She took a deep breath. "Ask me again, Miles. Ask me what you asked me on the porch that evening." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He slid from his chair to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Naomi Danvers, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she said simply. "As soon as it can be arranged." Miles rose and pulled her into his arms, his kiss both tender and passionate. When they finally parted, Naomi rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You know people will talk," he murmured into her hair. Naomi laughed softly. "Let them. We've survived worse." 2 weeks later, on a perfect September morning, Naomi and Miles were married in a small ceremony at the Double D. Reverend Patterson officiated, speaking eloquently about new beginnings and the courage it takes to open one's heart after loss. Eduardo stood as Miles's best man, while Maria stood with Naomi. Sheriff Cooper and Mr. Finch attended with their wives, along with a handful of neighbors who had refused to participate in Jenkins's campaign against Miles. Thomas's parents traveled from St. Louis for the occasion. They had corresponded regularly with Naomi since their son's death and had come to understand and support her decision to remarry. Mrs. Danvers, her eyes moist with mixed emotions, embraced Naomi before the ceremony. "Thomas would want you to be happy," she whispered. "And this Miles of yours seems a good man, despite his past or perhaps because he's faced it and overcome it." After the simple ceremony, the guests gathered for a celebratory meal under the oak trees. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon the yard was filled with music and laughter. As the sun began to set, Naomi found herself standing at the edge of the gathering, watching as Miles charmed her former mother-in-law with a story that had the older woman laughing heartily. Sheriff Cooper approached, handing Naomi a cup of punch. "Quite a change from last year," he observed. Naomi nodded. "Life has a way of surprising you." "That it does." The sheriff glanced toward Miles. "You know, when he first came to town, I had my deputy send some telegrams asking about him, got back some interesting responses." Naomi tensed slightly. "Oh," Cooper smiled reassuringly. "All good, Mrs. Weston, or should I still call you Mrs. Danvers for the ranch business?" "Naomi is fine, Sheriff," she said, relaxing. "Naomi, then." "What I heard was that wherever Miles Weston spent time, he left things better than he found them, helped build a school in one town. Saved a family from a flash flood in another. Man's been trying to balance his ledger with good deeds for years." He took a sip of his punch. "Seems to me he succeeded." Across the yard, as if feeling her gaze, Miles looked up and smiled at Naomi. It was the smile that had first breached her defenses, warm as spring sunshine after a long winter. He excused himself from Mrs. Danvers and made his way to Naomi's side, nodding a greeting to the sheriff. "May I steal my bride for a dance?" he asked. The sheriff tipped his hat and moved away, leaving them alone. Miles took Naomi's hand, leading her toward the area where others were dancing to a lively tune. "Happy?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "More than I thought possible," Naomi admitted, "though I do miss our song. The fiddle player doesn't know it." Miles grinned and led her away from the dancers, toward the porch where his guitar leaned against the railing. He picked it up and began to play the melody that had first brought them together, the tune she'd been singing alone that day when he rode onto her land. As the familiar notes rose into the evening air, Naomi began to sing, her voice clear and strong. Miles joined her, their voices twining together just as their lives had. One by one, the wedding guests fell silent, drawn to the haunting beauty of the ancient tune and the obvious love between the newly married couple. When the song ended, Reverend Patterson raised his glass. "To Miles and Naomi Weston," he called, "may your song continue for many years to come." The guests echoed his toast, and as Naomi looked around at the smiling faces, she felt the last weight of loneliness lift from her shoulders. The Double D would always hold memories of Thomas, and she would cherish them always. But now it would also be home to new memories, new joys, new beginnings. Miles set his guitar aside and drew Naomi into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of harmony yet to come.